And before we begin the session, I want to start with a land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge that UBCV, which is hosting this session, is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. We recognize that participants may be joining from various indigenous lands. So if you like to know more about the territory you are on, you can explore native.ca to learn more about the territories that you reside on. As this session will be talking about open education, I also like to acknowledge that Western notions of copyright law and ownership can be in tension with indigenous and traditional ways of learning. And moving on to the next slide here. While we won't be doing a deep dive into that topic today, Kayla Larson, the Indigenous Programs and Service Librarian for the Weiwa Library at UBC, hosted a session last year that did explore these tensions, and I'm going to put the link to the recording to the chat right here. Oh, it's actually already posted. And please don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions or would like more info about this session. And I'm going to move on to the agenda. So here's what we hope you leave with today. So introduction to GenAI and OER, how GenAI can be used to support or enhance the creation of OER, consideration of the use of GenAI for OER, example PEBC, implications for the future of OER, and as well as we'll do an activity of the draft chapter section of an open textbook. So I want to begin with the news article here. So this article from Fortune reports that 70,000 students are already using AI textbooks. This is in an article from last summer, and I have no doubt that the actual number is a magnitude higher. Last summer, Pearson and other textbook publishers report that they had already been incorporating Gen AI tools directly into textbooks, including chatbots that students can query with any question they might have about subjects and contents of the book, as well as generative AI into the practice question within the digital textbook. I think the important part is to recognize that however we feel about Gen AI, our students are already encountering and engaging it with their learning resources. And I'm going to pass it on to Lucas.
Wonderful. Thanks, Rie. So, similar to Pose, we want to really ensure that today's session is about you doing things, you trying things, rather than just us explaining stuff. So what we've done is we've developed a Google Docs worksheet. And if Rie, if you don't mind sharing that in the chat, that would be great. And for this session, what I'd like you to do is open up the worksheet. And on the worksheet, what you'll see is all of the different activities we do, all of the resources we mention, as well as a couple of content topics. So what we'd like you to do is to follow along with us on the worksheet. Sorry, let me just grab that worksheet for you. We'd like you to follow along with us on the worksheet, and we're going to ask you to try out some things with generative AI. So in addition to the worksheet, what you may want to do is have a generative AI tool open on your computer desktop. So you may want to, whatever tool works for you. It could be Copilot, it could be ChatGPT, it could be Gemini, it could be Claude. A reminder that at UBC, currently only 2 tools have privacy impact assessments for AI completed and can be used responsibly in the classroom, and that is Microsoft Copilot and ChatGPT 4.0, I think it's called Mini, which is the version of ChatGPT you can use without a login. So let's start by introducing OER and generative AI to everybody. And I want to start with a definition of generative artificial intelligence. So just a reminder, artificial intelligence is not new. There's a long educational history of integrating AI into teaching and learning spaces. However, generative AI has emerged more significantly since 2022 with the release of ChatGPT 3.5. So generative artificial intelligence is intelligence capable of generating text, images, videos, or other data using generative models, often in response to prompts. Generative AI models learn the patterns and structure of their input training data and then generate new data that has similar characteristics. So a couple points to raise there in the context of open. One is that we're generating new data with generative AI. It's not going on the internet and finding data and sharing it. It's generating new data. Secondly, is generative AI can generate data across different modalities, and we're seeing more and more of that. So video, code, natural language. And just a final mention, we know that generative AI's main function or main way of working is it's using complex word prediction. Although this is quite complex and the language often seems very natural, it is worth understanding that some of the limitations exist because of this architecture. So what is generative AI trained on? And I think again in when we're thinking about open education, this is an important question. And unfortunately, as venture capitalism money has flowed into these tools more, it's more and more opaque in how these tools are being trained. We do know a couple ways that ChatGPT 3.5 was trained. One is using the Common Crawl database, which was select archives of websites across 13 years, petabytes of web data in 40 languages and trillions of links. So that didn't scrape all pages, it scraped a select number of pages. Secondly, we know that a database called Books3 was used with ChatGPT 3.5, and there's been quite a bit of controversy around this particular database, as well as many of the books databases that have been used. So we know that these databases were scraped and open resources were used, but we also know that quite a number of pirated and copyrighted books were also used as training within these databases. And finally, we know that Wikimedia and all of the Wikipedia content was used in the training of ChatGPT 3.5. So as of now, there's many other sources, including many of the websites we go to, many of the social media that we use, and many of the articles and research that many of you have published are now being used for AI training. And that does bring up questions around open, around attribution, as well as around copyright that we're going to explore a little bit later.
So,
Yeah.
thanks. Yeah, so I think a lot of us here today are from POSE, the Program for Open Scholarship and Education. So this is probably familiar information, but we thought we'd talk a little bit about what open education is, just so we're all on the same page. So open education is really a bit of an umbrella term, but essentially it can be understood as a collection of practices that utilize online technologies and open copyright licenses to facilitate collaboration, transparency, social justice, and open sharing in education. And it really has the goals of removing access barriers to education as well as empowering instructors and students. Open educational resources are one important aspect of open education, and they are teaching and learning resources, and they can include full courses, course modules, textbooks, problem sets, streaming videos, images, and really any other materials that are free of cost barriers, and which also carry an open copyright license for open use. Generally, this open copyright license is a Creative Commons license that allows anybody to freely use, adapt, or share the resource anytime, anywhere, or for really any purpose. So OER, of course, is a great strategy for course content. It saves time and money as online versions are free for students and instructors. You can download and save. You can often download and save offline versions in multiple different formats, which is great for accessibility. There's no access code needed. There's no expiration dates to these materials. And as instructors, we can customize it to provide meaningful contextualized resources for our students. This means you can modify OER to meet your teaching and learning goals. You can translate it. You can change it to adapt it to your students' needs. By changing the format, you can make it more reflective of the diversity of experience and backgrounds of your students as well. And so I think one of the challenges that we have in the OER space is that we often pitch OER as free, but it's actually incredibly expensive and is paid for with the highest currency in academia, which is time, and particularly faculty time. So we know that OER is really important for creating and improving access to our learning materials, but we do have this incredible time barrier. So maybe with Gen AI, we have a tool that can help us decrease these expenses. And I'm going to hand it back to Lucas to talk a little bit about some strategies for doing this.
Wonderful. So let's think, to begin with, we're going to think a little bit about generative AI as a tool that we can use with OER. And we wanted to start right away by getting you to create a textbook page. And I'm going to demonstrate this. And in a moment, I'm going to give you a chance to do the same thing. So I'm just going to go to the worksheet now. And what you'll see on the worksheet is all of the activities that we talk about, as well as some of those links that I mentioned earlier around different repositories. So we've created a prompt, and what we're going to imagine is that we're creating a textbook page around sleep. So I'm going to paste in the prompt here, and I'll just go over the prompts and mention a couple elements of this prompt that we use to make it more effective. So act as a psychology professor. Generally, research around prompting shows that by giving the bot or the generative AI a role, you tend to get more specific and accurate data. Write 1,000-word, extremely detailed textbook section of the chapter for first-year college students in the processes involving sleep. So a couple things we've done there. We've used the word extremely detailed and we've given it a word count. Generative AI doesn't actually seem to count words. What it does do is it will kind of approximate length. So you can use word count, or sorry, number of paragraphs, overall length, etc. But it does take a little bit of back and forth with that. And then we included some elements, some specific elements of the textbook we wanted. So include learning objectives at the start and a glossary of terms at the end, as well as 4 quiz questions at the end that are targeted to 100 level psychology students and are based on their reading. So we've created the textbook page and we've created some elements within that page. You could elaborate on that prompt by doing things like taking an excerpt from an open textbook that you use and paste it into there to recreate the same style. Or you could ask it to create a textbook page that's similar to an OpenStax or a BC Campus textbook to work a little bit on formatting and how it's done. So here's our prompt, and I'm going to click enter. And I'm using ChatGPT to do this. You may want to use tools as well like Claude. What a lot of the benchmarking is finding right now is that the written output on Claude tends to be a little bit more accurate and a little bit more specific. And if you really want to challenge yourself, you can use a tool like Google Deep Research, ChatGPT Deep Research, or ChatGPT 03. Deep research tools share citations and they can use scholarly references. And 03 tools are called reasoning models, and I'm putting that in air quote, because they show their work and they do a process that's perhaps similar to reasoning to get a more accurate output. So I've put in the prompt now, and here's what we get. So we get an introduction to the process involving sleep. We get a set of learning objectives. We get stages of sleep, sleep architecture, brain structure, functions of sleep, and now we have a glossary of terms. And I'm not an expert in sleep in any ways, while I'm good at naps, but I don't have the expertise to analyze the accuracy or the biases within that data. And we're going to talk a little bit about bias and accuracy a little bit later. So you'll see it's created my glossary of terms and it's developed a set of quiz questions. So over to you now. What we'd like you to do now is activity one. We'd like you to think of a topic in your disciplinary area or an area of expertise. So a topic that you can create a textbook page for and then look back and be able to assess it a little bit. Use the provided guidelines. So you can use the guidelines in the prompt that I've included. So learning objectives, a glossary of terms, and 4 quiz questions at the end. And then once you've created the page, I'd like you to think about what worked, what was missing, and what were some of the challenges in doing this. And for the STEM instructors out there who have a ChatGPT paid account, you can use ChatGPT 03, or it looks like they don't have 01 anymore. So you can use ChatGPT 03 to get more accurate computational or mathematical data. All right. So over to you. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do this with your favorite tool. And after that, we're going to share back and we're going to hear about your experience. Oh, just one more thing. If you want to make it a little bit easier, what you can do is take the prompt that we've created here and just change some of the areas. So instead of psychology professor, use mechanical engineering professor, etc. So just use that as a prompt template. All right, 5 minutes. I'm going to stop sharing now and give you a chance to create that textbook page. So go ahead. All right. So let's get a couple folks to share back now. Why don't we start by using the mics and just unmuting yourself? And what I'd like you to share back is what is your subject area and what was good or what was effective about the textbook page output and what was limited with the page. So who wants to jump in? Again, you can raise your virtual hand or even just unmute yourself and jump in and kind of share your experience creating a textbook page.
Oh, hi. So this is Alma.
Hi, Alma.
I am a business analyst in University of British Columbia in the Department of IT.
Yeah.
And I ask in my prompt to generate a book related to the explanation of the process of diagrams, flow diagrams.
Yeah.
And it was very complete. And the only complaint I would say is about the diagram that was posted. So the draw wasn't a draw at all. It was just it's a way to make it more visual.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. So thanks, Rana. What I heard there was that, so you're doing a business analyst book, and I would suggest a page of a book or an excerpt from a book. And then you found the business analyst information quite good, but some limitations on the diagrams. And for diagramming, a couple things that I found helpful. One is that if you have a tool that you use for diagramming, you can look whether it imports some sort of code to it. So for example, mermaid.js is a code that you can use and upload into other diagramming tools. So rather than ask ChatGPT to create a diagram, you can ask it to create a diagram using a specific code so that you can then import it later. As Zorana pointed out, she prefers Claude a little bit better for that because it does provide that mermaid code for diagrams.
Thank you.
Thanks. Great. And I see a couple more folks want to jump in here, which is great. One moment here. Let me just find the hands here. I think Scott's next.
Hi, I'm in biochemistry,
Yeah.
and I asked ChatGTP to develop a section of a textbook on emerging roles of RNA.
Yeah.
And I'm absolutely shocked at what it came up with. The quality is very high.
Yeah.
It would certainly be it wouldn't be an end product by any means, but
Yeah.
as a way to get an outline, like kind of a draft mode of an
Yeah.
area, it's absolutely phenomenal. I'm taking this course I want to create an open course on RNA biology.
Yeah.
And this just blew my mind at how that was 2 days of work saved.
Wow. That's incredible. Thanks for sharing that. And so it was relatively accurate in a complex subject area, is what I'm hearing.
Absolutely. There's a few gaps I'd want to fill in and a few areas I'd want to add to. But in
Yeah.
terms of creating a framework to build off of, it's incredibly complete.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. And it's great to hear someone from the STEM disciplines talking about accuracy. Often that's where we see follow-ups with it as well.
Mhm.
I think Alexi's next. Excuse me if I'm mispronouncing your name.
Yes,
And
I was
yeah,
on it.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I teach statistics here at UBC,
Yeah.
and right now I'm writing a mini book on hypothesis testing.
Yeah.
So I'm planning to write a chapter on two-way ANOVA. So I developed by myself a whole workflow with 8 stages to implement all these
Yeah.
hypothesis testings. And I provided that workflow as an image,
Yeah.
and I asked the tool to provide a chapter on two-way ANOVA following this workflow. It's okay-ish. It's not
Yeah.
great. It's basically an outline, but it gives
Yeah.
you, doesn't give you like a full chapter, to be honest. And I
Okay.
was super specific on my prompt, and I asked the tool to give me like interpretations of the mathematical formulas in plain words,
Yeah.
but it didn't do it.
Okay. Okay. So some limitations there around.
Yeah, it's kind of limited, to be
Yeah.
honest. Like I guess I will need to insist on
Yeah.
with the tool to provide like these plain word explanations
Yeah.
I need for my students for this book. But in general, like this could be like a really good outline, like a really good skeleton for
Okay.
and
Wonderful.
yeah, but not like a fully ready product, to be honest.
Thanks for sharing. And I mean, a couple things that I hear a lot there was one of the limitations I think we hit sometimes is the information can be more general than we want.
Exactly.
So
Yeah,
you
yeah,
get into an outline. And then the other one is around equations and mathematics. And I will quickly, I'm just going to screen share for a moment here and mention 03. So I did my textbook chapter. Oh, there's my son's Roblox. I did my textbook chapter using ChatGPT 4 Omega. Especially if you're in the STEM fields, I recommend trying out 03. What 03 is going to get you is a lot more accuracy in the STEM areas. It does, I don't know if you get access it for free right now, but it does make a big difference in terms of quality.
I think I was using like the regular ChatGPT. Thank you
Yeah,
for the
give 03 a try. I mean, it doesn't
okay.
always solve all the limitations, but it can sometimes give you a better idea. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, thank
Peluso.
you.
Oh, hi. I'm a research ethics review coordinator at UBC, and I asked ChatGPT to write a 1,000 word
Yeah,
detailed textbook section for new researchers on the
yeah.
processes involved in human behavior research ethics review. And I'm not surprised. It was fantastic.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
not
What made it
surprised.
fantastic?
Yeah, like the learning objectives that, the introduction, even the types of review and some studies that will be exempt from review and the conditions for exemption.
Yeah,
It was really well outlined. It also had the step-by-step process of submitting, which, you know, coincides with what we practice here as well. And yeah, it's pretty good.
great. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
And Vivian.
Hello, my name is Vivian, and I asked a co-pilot
Yeah,
to do exactly the same thing on the topic of DNA structure, just as an introduction.
yeah.
The information was accurate because it's fairly basic and easily accessible, but I found issues with the quiz questions because it wouldn't allow me to do anything but multiple choice.
Yeah.
But it does allow me to actually pull rubrics and generate rubrics to assess understanding based on standard-based assessments. So I use that in order to generate a rubric for assessing understanding as opposed to just, choose A, B, C, or D. So that was impressive. But again, like the information was very good outline-ish, but I wouldn't say it had like enough details. And the other problem that I had with Copilot was that in order for me to, let's say, generate labeled diagrams or images to go along with the information, I had to sign in and create an account.
Okay. Okay. No, thanks.
Do.
Thanks for sharing that, Vivian. And then Ken will be our last.
Sorry, here I am. Yeah, I did. I teach forestry in a professional master's program in the Faculty of Forestry.
Yeah.
And I did a little slight twist on your paragraph that you seated us with.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, write a 500-word assignment for third-year college students on processes involved in forest operations. And I just kept all the rest, include learning objectives, and just changed psychology to forestry. And similar to other comments here, it provides like a really good structure and an outline, something that it's not always my best strength. So having things categorized is really helpful in the speed at which it does it. So it broke it down into pre-harvest planning, harvest operations, transportation, log handling, post-harvest activities. So as a general outline, like that's a very logical flow. Of course, like what other people have said, it's lacking in some of the details. Some of the description, the assignment description, it can be a little bit verbose. I can probably tidy up that language myself.
Yeah.
And add more details. But similar to what somebody else said, I mean, that just saved me probably at least a day of thought and writing to put a comparable outline together.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. And I'm just looking in the chat as you're talking, and I see a couple folks mention this lack of specificity they've run into as well. And again, this just kind of give you a taste of thinking about what generative AI might mean for creating OER. The last thing I wanted to share before we move on is you'll kind of see in the background, I've been playing with a Google Doc here. And this is an example of an output from a Google Gemini deep research tool. So most LLMs now, or most chatbots, have deep research tools built in. I use ChatGPT deep research quite often. I use Claude deep research, and I use Gemini deep research. And what deep research does is it cites and it creates much longer documents. So I did a little bit of research yesterday on how custom GPTs were changing teaching and learning in K-12 education. And this is the output. So we're looking at a 30-page output with a list of work cited that is, wow, 77 different websites listed, and you can actually force it to only use scholarly resources. So I've been doing a little bit of work in this space on course building, and I found that I can build really high quality course content using deep research to do it. But I guess the last thing I wanted to make, and I'm sure all of you probably play a lot with ChatGPT, with generative AI, and think about it, is we spent 10 minutes doing this. When developing 1 or 2 course pages, I've spent 2 or 3 days prompting the tool at this point, kind of going back and forth and refining and changing and adding information. So often it is an iterative process as well. So thanks very much for that participation. I'm really excited for the rest of the session, and we're going to kind of explore now in a little bit more detail some of the linkages and the ways that generative AI can be used as an OER tool. when we think about open educational resources, another aspect of open educational resources that have been quite challenging for the open community is adapting. So there's lots of open textbooks out there, but does it fit our discipline specifically? What changes do we need to make in order to make that text usable with our students? And are there different ways we can share the information? When I did more work around open, figuring out how to give faculty, staff the time to make these adaptations was a significant challenge. I think generative AI can be quite helpful now in quickly adapting open resources. And I see there is a question. I'm going to get to that in a few minutes. So thinking about adapting open resources, I just want to do a demonstration for you, and then I'm going to give you another activity where you get to play a little bit. So I've taken this excerpt from an open textbook focused on clear communication, developed by Matt Crossland. And I've used an open source just because I'm not totally comfortable right now in inputting copyrighted materials into generative AI. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that open resource. I'm going to open up a new ChatGPT conversation, and I'm going to paste that in. And then what I'm going to do is do some transformations on this text. And you're going to be doing this in a little bit. So the first thing I want to do is change the level of it. So if you look at it now, it's a clear communication. It's probably written for first or second year university students. I'm going to ask ChatGPT to act as a learning designer and adapt this to a grade 12 level. And we'll see what the output is. So now we're going to get an output, and it's actually explained. It simplifies the language. It's introducing the framework in a more accessible way, and it's laying this out. So thinking about the ability to take a textbook and change its reading level, change the level, or change the context. The second way I'd like to change this resource is to change the language. So I'm just going to repaste it in. Oh, wrong one. I'm going to repaste this in here. And I'm going to say translate into French. And now we're able to do a translation. The language ability of generative AI seems quite uneven, but in my experience, I've seen it translate languages that people had no idea it was able to do. I was recently teaching a course and it translated a South Indian language that the instructor's not able to even use Turnitin with because it's not recognized by it. So here we have a translation. We can also create visuals. And I'm not going to demonstrate the visual now, but I'm going to show you the visual that I created from that same document. So what I did is I copied in that same passage, and I asked ChatGPT to create a visual that I could use for a PowerPoint based on that passage. And this created the visual for me. So I can play with modalities. I can play with, I can translate from code to natural language. I can really change and adapt materials in different ways. And the final one I'm going to demonstrate for you is just changing the content to a table. So I'll just say create a table using the following content. I'll paste in the content. And it's going to generate a table that I could use to support the textbook or to support my students learning about that particular passage. So back over to you again. What I'd like you to do is revisit your textbook chapter and copy and paste the chapter into ChatGPT and adapt it in as many ways as you can. So I included language, format, level, and visual, but there's lots of other ways that you can adapt it. So again, I'll give you 5 minutes now. Take your textbook page, paste it in, and adapt it in different ways. As you've noticed while I'm doing the prompting, my approach is generally to do each way one at a time. Sometimes it's good if I ask it to translate, create a table, and change the level at the same time. But sometimes, due to the context window, it gets a little mixed up. So I tend to do things one at a time in that way. All right, over to you. 5 minutes, activity 3. So, and I see a question in the chat about how to cite AI from Diana that Rie just answered. I wanted to add a little bit about that is when you're citing or disclosing AI use, the AID framework that I just shared in the chat, in the Zoom chat, is a useful way to cite the use of AI. So it kind of breaks down the citations there. So 4 minutes left. And again, please feel free to share your questions in the chat as you go through this activity. I see that Will and Rie are answering them as we go, which is wonderful.
I have a question.
Yeah, please go ahead.
It's just easier for me to ask it than type
Yeah,
it.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I did the assignment. I put it into Chat GPT.
Yeah.
I don't see where the options are to make adjustments, or maybe I'm in the wrong version of Chat GPT.
So you need to make the adjustments yourself using a word, right? So once you paste the textbook chapter in there,
Okay.
you add one of those prompts. For example, act as a learning designer and adapt this for grade 12 learners.
Oh, okay.
Or
Gotcha.
usually
So
you
yeah,
can put it either at the top or the bottom. It doesn't seem to matter, at least for me.
Gotcha.
And then it will make the change.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Good question. I noticed that in the chat, Zorana mentioned that she was using Claude and having it refer to the original document rather than copying and pasting it each time. From my understanding, Claude does have a larger context window than ChatGPT, so it has a bigger memory to do those things with. Thank you. And then Alma writes, just a crazy idea, but it comes from a mom with 2 kids in different school levels. I wonder if there could be a way to create an interactive electronic book that adapts to learning rather than using a traditional book. That's a great question, and we're going to touch on that towards the end of this session. But I love that you're kind of imagining the possible, because right now we're in the MS-DOS stage of generative AI. It's going to be very interesting in a few years to think about these sort of possibilities. So, live adjustment of a textbook to suit a learner level. So 2 more minutes. And then I'm going to get a couple folks to share back. And again, thanks for all your question and participating in both the chat as well as using your mic. Just a bit of a side note is most of these models now take PDFs and they're able to read them. So you're actually able to upload textbook chapters with PDFs and do some adaptations that way as well. Wonderful. And Vivian mentions this makes adaptations for EELL and learning designations much easier. Absolutely. Thank you. So 1 more minute. And Wei-Ming mentions, I can see the table adaptation being very useful in creating a summary table to be included at the end of the chapter for students who need a refresher for the content during revision or study times. And that's an interesting comment, Wei Ming. From what I've been reading a little bit in the research, is students are now using the materials we give them, and they're adapting it by doing things like creating tables, creating glossaries, simplifying language as part of their studies as well. Wonderful. So would a couple folks want to share back what they adapted and what the quality was like, or ways that they might use the ability to adapt open resources in their day-to-day work? So I think we have time for a couple folks if you want to unmute yourselves and jump in. Did anyone find anything that surprised them?
And I see a couple hands up, and maybe starting with Ken. So.
Thanks, Will. I'm not seeing hands very well.
Sure. Okay, so I just took the assignment that I used AI to create for third year forestry students and pasted that in, and I just asked it to adapt this for grade 5 children. And
Okay.
actually, I'm pretty impressed. Like, it used pretty simple grade age appropriate language. And again, it's very much skate across the pond.
Yeah.
It's kind of giving you it's giving you information about all the stuff that you, if you're not familiar with this, that you don't know about, but then you'd
Yeah.
have to dig into further. So that's for me as a lecturer, that's
Yeah.
like such an awesome starting point, because sometimes just organizing these ideas into logical sections and sequences,
Yeah.
sometimes the most difficult part. You know, going down rabbit holes, we're all academics, that's easy for us to do.
That I love that. I love that. And I think about, expert blind spots and how
Yeah.
as faculty, you may not be able to see things in a way, the same way your students do. You have such deeper, richer knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for sharing. One of my favorite prompts is explain it like I'm 5. Works really well for most articles. Karina, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm just a grad student. I got my master's. I do mostly like horticulture, kind of plant
No,
science
not
stuff.
just a grad student. Okay.
Well, I didn't want to say I was a faculty member or anything. That would be amazing. But yeah, I tried to do the language aspect because I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
So I had it change everything into Polish, which is like
Yeah.
what my parents speak. And I'm thinking it could be so useful because not only is there like a regular English to like scientific English language barrier, there's like to scientific Polish that I've
Oh,
never
yeah.
ventured into in my life. And I try to explain it to my parents, and we're both confused about what I've been doing for the last like 2 years. So I thought that was really cool. And it's interesting to see like what those terms have become, or like things to keep in for later. But one thing I'm noticing, and I've run into this before, is the images don't work for me. They just time out like endlessly. So I wouldn't be able to like do the infographic like ability of ChatGPT. I just find it just is still loading right now. So
Yeah, that's why I didn't
yeah.
demonstrate
Yeah.
it. It takes a while to do the images sometimes.
Mhm.
Thanks for sharing.
No problem.
Will, do you see any other hands up there? For some reason, I'm not seeing the hands right now. Are we good?
I think we're good. I don't see any other hands.
Wonderful. So thanks again. Great sharing, folks. The last thing I want to do before moving on is just share one last example of adaption. And that is a faculty member in forestry at UBC, Neil Leverage, has adapted his communication strategies for natural resource professionals using AI. And the way he's done this is to make this open resource more accessible. So he's taken each chapter of the book, he's used ChatGPT to change the language into a certain genre. And then he's used a program called 11 Lab to record a voice reading that particular chapter. And he's given his students choices whether they want to listen to the chapter or read it. And I'll just play you an excerpt from the documentary style.
Foundations. Communication in natural resources. Picture this. You're deep in the forest, surrounded by the towering trees of British Columbia. The air is cool, crisp, and you can hear the rustle of wildlife all around you. Now,
I can almost see how that documentary would be. The last one I'll play.
Foundations.
Serenity.
Communication in natural resources. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine you're standing in the heart of a quiet forest.
All right, we'll stop there. But I think that's a really creative use of the ability to adapt a resource to make it more accessible to all of our learners in different ways. And talking to Neil about this project, when he asked students about which one of these voices they were accessing the most, they said all of them. So I think it's interesting to be able, again, to make things more accessible for our learners. All right. So what we're going to move on to now is we've talked about some of the ways that generative AI can be helpful and can support open. What we haven't talked about yet, and that I'm sure many of you are aware of, is that there's significant limitations and even tensions between the idea of open practice and open education and generative AI. And we'd like to go over a few of these with you now. One of them is the AI scraping. Will's going to talk a little bit more about copyright in a little bit and what it might mean. But what we do know now is that AI is scraping the web like nothing we've seen before. And we're starting to see AI being trained in areas that we don't necessarily give it permission to. So one example here is that Facebook is starting to feed its AI with private, unpublished photos. Reddit sued Anthropic, which was the creator of Claude, for scraping user comments to train its chatbot. Web scraping AI bots are being compared right now to DDoS attacks because of the amount of strain they're putting on websites by constantly scraping them. So we've seen archival websites go down because of this. And we've also seen publishers sharing papers, sharing copyrighted articles for training these tools. And I think this brings up lots of questions about intellectual property. And also I think it brings up the ethics for some of us in using the outputs generated by these tools, which were trained in ways that weren't authorized in many cases, which really goes the opposite of open, where we talk about fairness and attribution with the creator of the knowledge or of the content. And Will's going to explore this a little further with you now.
Yeah, so I think there's two sort of tensions around copyright when it comes to Gen AI and OER. And the first is the question, can works that have been created through Gen AI be copyrighted? So much of copyright law gets determined through court cases and lawsuits. And so this question is still in flux, but we're beginning to see some pretty clear trends. The first trend is there's generally no copyright protection for AI-generated content. So in most legal jurisdictions, copyright law requires human authorship. Specifically, Canadian copyright law requires that a work be original and exhibit a degree of human skill and judgment to qualify for protection. And this traditionally implies human authorship. So work that is being created by a Gen AI tool doesn't have that human input into it. So it's generally not being recognized as copyrightable by courts right now. That said, there is partial copyright for AI-assisted works. So if a human significantly contributes to an AI-generated work, such as through detailed prompting or editing or modification, the human contribution can be copyrighted, but the AI generated portion remains uncopyrightable. And again, this is still in flux. Recognizing sort of the challenges in this space, the Canadian government initiated a public consultation period in October 2023 and went on for several months, and it sought input on how existing copyright laws should adapt to AI technologies. And they heard both from users of the tools and the creators of the tools, but also from copyright holders and creators and authors. And so we haven't really seen any legislative amendments or changes coming out of those public consultations, but they may in the future. An important thing to also think about is that many of the Gen AI tools have terms of services that can affect the sort of legal or the sort of standing of their outputs. So some allow, users to claim ownership and kind of just grant rights of the content, but others retain rights or grant content usage to the creators based under specific licenses. Particularly, the more you pay for a tool, the more rights you generally have over the outputs of that tool. If you're using the free tools, oftentimes the Gen AI tools want to assert rights over that. And again, there's court cases around these too. Can they assert rights over non-copyrightable materials is a question. And generally, it's not seen that way. So there's some legal uncertainty. Again, laws are evolving. There's ongoing lawsuits. I think there's something like 40 lawsuits in the US currently moving through that will impact rulings, and we'll begin to see probably new government frameworks being put out in the future. And maybe with that, I'll move on to the next sort of question that comes up with copyright is, did the training models that the companies use to create Gen AI tools violate copyright itself? And as Lucas kind of alluded to, they're really scraping the web. And basically, in their white paper, AI Commons, Alex Tarkowski and Susanna Warsaw of the Open Future Foundation basically say there's two legal approaches for creating AI data sets. And the first approach creates the data set by scraping the raw internet, and then they rely upon copyright exceptions like transformative use or fair dealing to say that this is a legally justified use of this copyrighted material. And the second one, the second approach is to use a pool of open educational resources or open work or content that has open licenses to ensure that they're complying with the open copyright licenses been applied to these works. So like ethically, I think as Lucas was alluding to, the situation is a lot more complex than sort of a technocratic view of copyright. So just going on to the next slide, the use of OER in unintended or extractive areas isn't entirely new. And in fact, as Alex Tarkowski and Paul Keller note in their paper, The Paradox of Open, it is both that open can be both a challenge to and an enabler of concentrations of power. So for example, when Rie was doing our land acknowledgement for this session, she noted that open can be in tension with Indigenous and traditional ways of knowing. And this tension exists because open is often primarily based on copyright and intellectual property law. So Daniel Heath Justice, who's a professor in UBC's Department of First Nations and Indigenous Studies, describes the core of the issue this way. He says, knowledge is never just about individuals. It's about communities. It's about genealogies, and it's about history. Community has to be at the heart of our understanding of knowledge production and knowledge dissemination. And when we're talking about multiple communities in dialogue, then we have to think very much about our relationships of power and how power impacts knowledge production, knowledge maintenance, and also knowledge dissemination. Who decides which knowledge should be shared, to what end, and why? And these are the kind of questions that are not just about community, but about the tension between community and individuals. And so this is something that the open education community has been struggling with when we make something open. Who are we making it open for, and what rights do we have to make that content open? And I think this is not a conversation that has been completely embraced inside the sort of Gen AI communities and the emergence of these tools. So I really like this quote from Paul Stacey that in order to mitigate harm, including safety and security concerns, open licenses and open copyright licenses need to evolve from simply being open to being open and responsible. And so we're beginning to see that a little bit. One of the examples going back to Indigenous and traditional knowledge is one of the sort of older examples, and this is the traditional knowledge labels. So these traditional knowledge labels are labels that can be affixed to content that identify and clarify community-specific rules and responsibilities regarding access and use of traditional knowledge. For example, the licenses outline traditional protocols and invite viewers to respect the community protocols where the knowledge is coming from and indicate what sort of uses or activities the traditional communities have approved for use of this knowledge. The labels may require direct engagement with primary cultural authorities, as another example. In the AI space, we're beginning to also see some looking at this as well. So RAIL licenses, or responsible AI licenses, are licenses that developers of open source materials, including code or data sets or algorithms, can apply to their open source materials that sort of indicate how AI developers can use these technologies. And they can be used in order to prevent irresponsible and harmful applications built on the technology. So these licenses can include things like behavioral use clauses that go beyond copyright to restrict uses that violate laws, harm or exploit minors, disseminate false information, impersonate others, discriminate based on social identities or personal characteristics, or exploit vulnerabilities of vulnerable people. And there's a lot more. Of course, Creative Commons, which created most of the open copyright licenses that we rely upon for open education, is also looking into this idea. And I'm going to just hand it over to Rie to talk a little bit more about the Creative Commons license approach.
Yeah, okay, so I'll talk about the Creative Commons license. So how does AI apply to things like the Creative Commons license? So Creative Commons license is a license that allows others to share and reuse the content, and it was created before generative AI became mainstream. And as a result, creators who license their work under Creative Commons may not have anticipated how their work will be used, especially that it might be used to train AI system, and some creators don't like that. So recognizing this, the organizations behind Creative Commons has been exploring ways for creators to express their preference about how AI can be used in their work. And one important point to understand is, for those who took the POST program may be familiar with this, but Creative Commons operates on top of copyright law. So what this means is they cannot impose additional restrictions that go beyond what copyright law allows. And unfortunately, in the US, there have been several strong legal cases suggesting that using copyrighted works for AI training is permitted under fair use. So they can't really use Creative Commons to further restrict on things. So this area is still evolving, but as of August 2024, Creative Commons is introducing what's called a preference signal. So the preference signal will allow content stewards, so like content collections and stuff, to indicate specific criteria regarding how their content can be used in AI training. And so far, example of these signals include things like requiring AI to give proper credit, asking for monetary contributions, ensuring the AI system is open source, or contributes to the broader ecosystem. So Creative Commons is still working on these preference signal. So if you are interested in this area, I recommend following the Creative Commons blog, which I'll post in the chat right here.
Wonderful. And, as we're thinking about generative AI, I think one of the challenges we're seeing online right now, some would arguing we're almost seeing the death of the internet in some ways, with the rise of AI slop and AI content that is inaccurate in all areas of the internet, from social media to websites to news sources. And I wanted to give one example, a couple things here. One is an example. Can I get a thumbs up if you've seen the Google AI overviews when you do a search on the internet? So again, a thumbs up if you've seen the Google AI overviews. I'm hoping to see lots of thumbs here. So I think many of us have seen these overviews. And what I've been reading in search engine optimization, blog posts, etc., is overviews are completely destroying web search in some ways. Rather than going to the specific websites, people are just reading the overviews. And this is an example from someone who asked, can I use gasoline to cook spaghetti? And this was the answer from the overview. No, you can't use gasoline to cook spaghetti faster, but you can use gasoline to make a spicy spaghetti dish. Here's the recipe for spaghetti cooked with gasoline. So this is just a little bit of a strong example of the challenge now that AI data may be 70% accurate, but it's 100% confident. And as people who are working with these tools to generate open resources or to adapt open resources, how do we evaluate for these errors? How do we take responsibility for these errors? And how do we allocate time to search for and correct all these errors? Recently, I was using generative AI to help me with a course that I was developing. And what I found after getting about 4 days into developing this course is there were significant errors in the outline of the course. And it actually ended up taking me more time to fix these errors than it would have taken it to write it from scratch. So when we're thinking about using artificial intelligence to develop resources and to adapt them, how do we think about these errors? I wanted to give you an example here of a diagram to think about this. This is from a UNESCO article. When is it safe to use ChatGPT? And this came out in 2023. So start. Does it matter if the output is true? No. Well, it's probably safe to use. Yes. Do you have the expertise to verify that the output is accurate? And I think having this expertise is quite challenging. The more sophisticated these tools get, the more these errors and biases can get more difficult it is to find them and to correct them. Secondly, bias. We know that generative AI tools have bias built in them, use stereotypical narratives, and we need to think about how we sort, how we evaluate for bias, and how we correct for bias within the resources we create. Another aspect, another limitation is one that I think is very close to many of us, is privacy. So we know that a lot of institutional data is going into these tools, and the terms of services on these tools and the security of these models are limited at this point. So we have student data risk. When we upload student data into these tools, or when we copy paste student data into these tools, we risk that this data ends up elsewhere due to security. We also risk that their data is being used for training. And there's also an intellectual property risk. If we're thinking about things like patents or information that we really don't want out there, we may want to reconsider using generative AI, or may want to use a local model that we're able to download and use on our local machine. We can also think about equity. I think with generative AI, we're running into significant equity issues, and we've even seen this a little bit in this workshop. We know that if you have a paid version of generative AI, you're going to get a much higher quality output. We also know that generative AI, in a way, can be seen as widening the digital divide. It's creating pay to play. It's requiring faster computers to use, and it's requiring access to these tools. On the other hand, as we've seen in some of these examples, we can improve access with generative AI. We can support personalized instruction, as I showed in Neil Leverage's example, and we can help students access these tools better, regardless of their barriers to learning. And the final point I wanted to bring up is environmental impact. Generative AI does have an environmental impact, although I think there's a lot of contentious aspects of this right now. We know that when we use generative AI, it tends to require more electricity at the server farm level, more water to cool it off. And because of that, there's been a lot of critique of generative AI for sustainability and for environmental issues. On the other hand, the environment isn't an area that I think we've done a lot of thinking about with digital tools in general. So AI is the first time outside of Bitcoin where I've seen a lot of discussion around how digital tools are impacting the environment. Streaming, for example, streaming a YouTube video also has a significant cost in terms of electricity and water usage, as done many of the things that we do on the internet. So while generative AI does have an environmental impact, and it's worth thinking about some of these ways of reducing that, I think we need to go a little bit bigger and think about the impacts of digital tools in general on environmental sustainability. Will?
Yeah, so as we've seen, AI can be a tool to sort of streamline and make the creation or adaptation of OER really efficient. But we do have these tensions and considerations that have to be thought about when using it. So we're beginning to see the emergence of guidelines. I particularly like these guidelines that come from BC Campus's OER creation toolbook, and I'll put a link into it in a sec. But they generally recommend to be cautious with your use of AI-generated content. And specifically, you want to review and verify your AI-generated content for bias and accuracy. As you create OER, you should think of this as a scholarly publication. And can you represent that the work in your publication is accurate and non-biased? You have to have that sort of skill set to be able to do that if you're using generated AI tools. You also should be transparent about your use of AI. Generally, in scholarship, we always want to cite our sources, and AI makes it very hard to know where our sources are coming from. And to get around that, or to be reflective of that, we can be transparent about our use of AI. So if we're using it for creating completely new content, we can say we use ChatGPT 4.0 to generate this, or we used it for creating the outline and I created the content ourselves. And this will just help your readers and your peers and your students know sort of how this content and this knowledge was generated. They also recommend being cautious with intellectual properties. And we know that AI tools often are scraping everything, and they're also often scraping your inputs that are going into them. So if you're working on things that you don't want to be incorporated into a Gen AI tool, such as if you're working on anything with a patent, or you want to publish an actual book that's not open, but under your copyright, under sort of full copyright protection, you probably don't want to put any of that information into a Gen AI tool. And then again, you just want to ensure accurate representation, making sure that the information is there. In our earlier example, when we were asking you to develop a page or a couple pages of a textbook chapter, I saw numerous comments that were sort of like the content is very surface level, but there was also examples that seemed out of place. And these are the sort of things you want to go in and make sure that the examples are actual real examples, that you can verify them, that their representation is reflective of the subject material, of your intended uses, things like that. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and sort of skip forward to thinking about future directions and what might be happening in the future with Gen AI. One of the questions that comes up is, can the model of open education or open scholarship or OER be applied to AI itself? And I would say, yeah, we're definitely going there. I like this definition of open source AI from the Open Source Initiative, which, if you're not familiar about it, it's a nonprofit originally based in the US, but sort of global now, whose mission is to educate and advocate for the benefits of open in software. And they say an open source AI is an AI system that grants the freedom to use the system for any purpose and without having to ask for permission, to study how the system works and inspect its components, to modify the system for any purpose, including to change its output, and to share the system for others to use without modification for any purpose. And these sort of 4 points, I think, align quite well with the idea of the rights inherent in open resources as well. So Martin Weller, and here's some examples of open source AIs. So these are some of the big ones. There's quite a few more. Llama is one that's probably used the most. Ollama is another one, OpenLLM, Mistral. These are all different types of open source AIs that you can download and run. And what we're finding out is lots of institutions are beginning to download those and create tools based upon them because they do have that control over them. So the UBC LLM Sandbox, which is a new tool being developed here at UBC, that will be a privacy-focused Gen AI platform tailored to Canadian higher education needs, and it will enable faculty to safely experiment with AI in their courses. That's being developed on the open source tool Ollama that's being run here. Places like Stanford or Berkeley are using Llama, and you can see they're playing on the name. So there's alpaca, there's koala, to sort of fit and develop their needs as well. So having the idea of open gives you a lot more control because you have those rights of being able to inspect it, being able to know how it's used. So Martin Weller kind of drives this point home. And he says much of AI and OER is open education as a product, and instead open should be thought of as a process. This emphasizes the benefits of open educational practices in promoting social justice, developing community, changing pedagogy. However, it's hard to say that Gen AI systems based on closed box algorithms, unknown data sources, and controlled by large corporations, and I would say mainly corporations in the US these days, with an agenda of expansion and control are in the spirit of open, whatever the practical advantages are on a day-to-day basis. So if openness in education means anything, then it should be about advocating for openness in these areas. Transparency around Gen AI models, clarity of their data sources, and whether your own data is actually your own data and your own content is being used by these models, and open source approaches that allow for that control. And so I'm really happy to see universities like UBC and others universities playing with open AI tools to have a better understanding and creating usable models for our faculty and our students. And Ken, I see you have a question.
Yeah, so the two tools that are PIA approved, they're MS Copilot and ChatGPT 4.0. Are those the only tools we can use? Like you brought up all these other tools, okay, the open source, but how does that fit in with the PIA, and what sort of restrictions does that place on me or even my students?
Lucas, do you want to jump in on this, or?
Yeah, I would say that currently the two tools that mentioned are PIA approved. And if you were working around an open source tool, you would want to do a PIA process around that as well. You do have the ability as faculty to run PIAs with these tools. With a particular learning technology, you can reach out to the LT Hub for support with thinking about that. Will, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so generally, and I'll just draw from open pedagogy, is that students should never be required to give up personal identifying information or privacy to complete an assignment. So that's the concern, I think, a lot with these tools, particularly where they have to create accounts and log in to being able to use them. That isn't to preclude students are using these tools, and they can opt to do this, but they can't be required to do it.
Okay.
So where are we seeing, where do we think Gen AI will push open education in the future? And David Wiley is one of the original scholars of open education. And he's been arguing that Gen AI has the potential to solve the Bloom 2 sigma problem. If you're not familiar with the Bloom 2 sigma problem, it found that it was a research study that Bloom and his colleagues demonstrated that the average student who is tutored full-time outperforms 98% of students who learn in a traditional classroom setting. So Wiley basically says tutoring is an incredibly powerful teaching method, and maybe Gen AI will finally make this capability broadly available at a reasonable and scalable cost. And if you think about it, this sort of improvement in learning is really kind of at the heart of open in a lot of ways. So he's very excited about the possibility of open Gen AI really improving learning outcomes for students. So Wiley says, what would that look like? And he says maybe in the future, educators won't write textbooks at all. Instead, they only maybe will just be writing structured collections of highly crafted prompts or even chatbots, I would say, rather than our traditional textbooks. So with that, maybe we're going to do one. We have just a couple of minutes, but maybe I'll just demonstrate this and let you do this on your own. But this was going to be our final sort of interactive piece. So take your textbook chapter that you produced earlier on and try to transform that into a dialogue model. And this is a general prompt. Create 5 questions that will help me develop an understanding of your topic. Ask me the questions one at a time, wait for my answer, and then give me feedback, and then wait for the next answer. And I'm just going to share my screen really quickly and share that. So sorry, I'm in dark mode. I'm just gonna make this a little bigger. I put the chat in. So I'm saying act as a tutor at a university level course, create 5 questions.
Well, I'm not seeing your screen, I don't think. Oh, let me double check. Sorry.
Can people see my screen?
Yeah, I'm still seeing the PowerPoint.
I see it.
Oh, do you? Okay. Go ahead, Will.
Looks like people in the discussion. So I'm just going to plug that in. Again, we're talking about the science of sleep. So it says, absolutely, let's dive into the psychology of sleep. I'll guide you with feedback and questions. Question 1, what are the primary stages of sleep and how are they broadly categorized? And I'm just going to say, I'm not sure. Could you explain them? And then it'll start, sort of walking me through that understanding. So it'll say there's 2 main categories within category 1. There's these 3 stages. So rather than making me read through a chapter, it's going to ask me some questions and make me prompt and follow up on that. If we had more time, I would take 5 minutes to ask, but maybe we can just take 2 minutes and then come back as a group. So if you have the ChatGPT open, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I want to play with this in the next 2 minutes. Go ahead and do that, and we'll come back in 2 minutes and have a quick debrief and answer some questions. Well, we're at 1 minute off, and I do want to be mindful of people's time. And I just kind of want to end on the question, as we think about the future of AI, is are these dialogues open education? And I think that will be a question that will depend upon a lot of things, but something that we want to keep in mind as an open education community is how do we ensure that the learning that can happen through Gen AI tools like this does remain open. And I think with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up and conclude. But I'm happy to stay around. I think, Lucas, if you have time, or Rie, we can hang for a couple minutes if people do want to ask questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording as well at this point. But please ask questions if you do have them. And thanks for joining us today.